You already know the feeling. You tried. Maybe you tried hard, and it didn't work. And the moment it didn't work, something shifted, not just in the situation, but in the story you started telling yourself about who you are. The failure didn't stay where it happened. It followed you into the next morning, into the next attempt, into the quiet moments when no one is watching and the voice gets loudest. This is not weakness. This is not a character flaw. It is something more specific and more treatable than that. It is a mind that has been taught by school, by culture, by every highlight reel it has ever scrolled through. That failure is a verdict. That when something doesn't work, it means something permanent about you. But the people who are succeeding are the ones who simply don't fail the way you do. And so you do what almost everyone does when that belief takes root. You stop, not all at once, slowly. You stop sending the message because what if it goes unanswered? You stop starting the thing because what if it falls apart? You stop raising your hand because what if you're wrong in front of everyone? You call it being careful, being realistic, protecting yourself from unnecessary pain. But underneath all of it is one quiet, devastating fear that if you try and fail again, you will finally have the proof you have been dreading all along. That belief is not the truth. It is a map drawn by someone who has never heard what the samurai knew. And the samurai knew something about failure that changes everything. He was 13 years old. His opponent was a trained adult warrior, experienced, armed, and completely certain of how this would end. The boy had traveled alone to the challenge. No master beside him. No second to speak on his behalf. Just a wooden sword he had carved himself and a confidence that had not yet been tested by anyone worth testing it against. He lost, not with grace, not with dignity. He was beaten into the dirt, humiliated in front of witnesses, and sent home carrying nothing but bruises and a silence he didn't know what to do with. That boy was Miyamoto Musashi, the man who would go on to fight 61 duels and win every single one. The man who would write the most studied text on strategy and mastery in Japanese history. The man whose name, 5 centuries after his death, is still spoken with reverence across disciplines from martial arts to business to philosophy. None of that story exists without that first defeat. And here's the part that matters most. Musashi did not walk away from that loss and vow never to lose again. He did not spiral into shame. He did not retreat from the path or decide the path was not for him. He walked away asking one question. A question so simple it barely sounds like philosophy, but quietly became the foundation of everything he ever built. What does this require of me next? Not why did this happen to me? Not what does this say about me? Not is this a sign that I should stop? What does this require of me next? That question is the entire philosophy. Everything else is detail. In feudal Japan, a samurai's training did not begin with the sword. It began with Shugyo. Shugyo resists clean translation. The closest English approximation is austere training through voluntary hardship. But even that doesn't fully hold it. Shugyo is the deliberate practice of placing yourself inside difficulty. Not because suffering is noble, but because there are things that can only be forged under pressure and cannot be learned any other way. A samurai under Shugyo training would wake before dawn, train until the body gave out completely, then train again the next morning. Not as punishment, as construction. The belief underneath, it was radical and simple. You cannot be shaped by comfort. A sword is not made in stillness. It is hammered, bent, folded, and driven in a fire repeatedly until the steel holds an edge that nothing else can produce. The samurai saw themselves as that steel. Failure was not the enemy of the blade. Failure was the hammer. It was not something to be avoided. It was the very mechanism through which a warrior became worth anything at all. This is why defeat in samurai culture carried none of the identity-destroying weight modern life has placed on it. Failure was expected. It was required. A samurai who had never failed was a samurai whose blade had never been tested. And a blade that has never been tested cannot be trusted when everything is on the line. The second concept is Kaizen Gai-san. Continuous, deliberate, incremental improvement. Not the single redemptive moment. Not the dramatic comeback. Small, honest, forward movement every single day without exception. Kaizen reframes what failure actually is at its core. It is not a verdict. It is a measurement. It tells you the precise distance between where you currently stand and where the path requires you to be. Without that measurement, you're training blind. With it, you have a most honest map available. The one drawn not from theory, but from contact with reality. The samurai did not resent that map. They studied it. They sat with it in silence until they understood every line of it. Then they moved. The third and most powerful concept is Mushin, the state of no mind. Mushin is not the absence of thought. It is the absence of being trapped by thought. A samurai in Mushin is fully present, fully committed, and free from the need to have the outcome confirm his worth. He has trained through meditation, through ritual, through the daily practice of releasing attachment, to a place where the mind no longer grips the result as proof of who he is. This is the center of everything. When your identity is fused to your results, failure becomes catastrophic. It doesn't just mean something went wrong. It means you were wrong. It reaches past the event and attacks the person underneath it. That is not a natural response to failure. That is what happens when no one has taught you to separate your value from your outcomes. Musashi wrote in the Book of Five Rings that the warrior must hold no attachment to life or death, to victory or defeat. He must move forward through each moment with complete clarity and complete commitment. Not because outcomes don't matter, but because a mind that is gripped by the terror of a bad result cannot think clearly, cannot adapt, and cannot find the next right move. That is not fearlessness. That is something better. That is freedom. Look at how we live now. More access to opportunity, more tools, more information than any generation before us. And yet more people are stuck, more people are paralyzed, more people are quietly waiting for a guarantee before they will take a single step than at any point in recent history. Because we have built a culture that treats failure as identity. A failed business does not mean the venture didn't work. It means you didn't work. A failed relationship does not mean two people grew apart. It means you are unlovable. A failed attempt does not mean the method needs adjusting. It means you're simply not enough. Every platform, every curated image of a life that never shows the mess behind it, every success story that begins at chapter 3 and leaves out chapters 1 and 2, all of it quietly reinforces the same lie. That the people winning never fail the way you do. That failure is what happens to those who were never meant for more. The samurai would recognize this immediately, not as weakness, but as a warrior handed a broken compass. You were taught that failure is the opposite of success. They knew that failure is the road to it. You were taught that struggling means something is wrong with you. They knew struggling means the forge is doing exactly what a forge is supposed to do. The wall you build around yourself to stay protected from failing again is the very thing standing between you and whoever you were supposed to become. 3 practices drawn directly from samurai discipline, available to you today. The first is what Musashi called the daily review of the sword. Each night before sleep, ask yourself 2 questions and only 2. What did I fall short today? And what is the one adjustment that would change that outcome tomorrow? Not a list of self-criticisms, not an extended session of regret. 1 gap, 1 answer. Write it down, then close it. The samurai never carried the previous day's defeat into the next day's preparation. The review was a ritual of release, not a life sentence. You acknowledge what happened, extract what it teaches, and put it down so that tomorrow begins clean. The second is voluntary Shugyo, deliberate, weekly contact with discomfort. Once each week, do the one thing you have been avoiding because you're afraid of doing it imperfectly. Send the message. Make the call. Start the draft. Publish the work. The quality is not the point yet. The movement is the point. The samurai did not enter their first duel expecting mastery. They entered expecting information. Information is what failure gives you. Go collect yours. The blade only discovers what it is made of inside the fire, not in the room where the fire is being described. The third is Shoshin Chushin, the beginner's mind. A beginner carries no shame about failing because a beginner is supposed to be finding their footing. Shoshin is the practice of returning to that state deliberately, regardless of how much experience you already hold, so that you remain open, teachable, and freed from the pressure of protecting what you have already built. The greatest samurai masters in Japanese history called themselves students of the sword until their final breath. Not from modesty, from strategy. When you're always a student, every failure arrives as the next lesson, exactly on time, exactly as it was supposed to. I know what it is to carry a failure that will not stay where it happened. The kind that followed me into the next morning and the one after that. The kind that made me smaller in ways I didn't fully notice until I looked back and realized how many things I had talked myself out of, how many doors I had decided not to knock on. Because somewhere underneath the logic of it all was the fear of having that feeling again. What shifted was not learning how to stop failing. It was learning to stop treating every failure as a final answer about who I am. The samurai did not eliminate failure from their lives. They changed their relationship with it completely. They made it useful. They made it the teacher instead of the verdict. They asked not why is this happening to me, but what does this require of me next? That question does not make failure painless, but makes it purposeful. Your setbacks are not evidence against you. They are the exact shape of the path beneath your feet. Every stumble pointing to the next thing the road requires you to learn. Musashi lost his first duel. He carried that loss forward not as a wound, but as a compass. And 60 victories followed. You're not behind. You're not broken. You're being forged. 不动心, Fudoshin, the immovable mind, not one that is never shaken, but one that cannot be swept away. If this reached you today, write in the comments, I am being forged. Thank you for being here. Take good care of yourself and the path you are still on.